Welcome back to Generals and Napoleon, episode 46, General Caulaincourt, Napoleon's ambassador to Russia, foreign affairs minister, and Grand Marshal of the Palace. We have a special guest on the phone today that I'm very excited to have joining us. Her name is Irene Kim, and she is an expert in the 1812 invasion of Russia. And say hello. We're happy to have you.
Hello, Irene here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, no, my pleasure, Irene. For those of you who don't know Irene, she has a fantastic Twitter page that I highly, highly recommend. Her handle is at the number two, Ekins, like 2 second, hyphen crossing, 2 second crossing. And she does a wonderful account of not only the 1812 campaign, but all things Napoleon, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. How did you kind of get into this topic or subject?
So my interest in Napoleon per se dates back to when I was in elementary school, when I was interested in everything history. And then last summer, when I was struggling with my life, I came across the primary sources of the 1812 campaign, and I suddenly thought maybe I could track this campaign day by day, especially with the voices of not the highborn, but more of the everyman who suffered in the back of huge baggage train.
Yeah, the common soldier, really.
Yeah.
And so you're turning all this information, which is tremendous. Again, it's on your Twitter page, but you're making this whole journal into a book, correct?
Yes, I didn't know it would become this big of a project, but the more I wrote, the more detailed it got, and here I am on the editing rabbit hole.
Well, we look forward to the book, and I'll definitely let my listeners know when it comes out. So we're looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I thought today, and I've had many requests to cover this general. He's such an interesting fellow. The guy we're going to cover today is Armand de Caulaincourt. What is our thumbnail sketch of this man who is a really important aide to Napoleon?
He was a cavalry officer, the master of the horse, or the Grand Equerry, as well as the French ambassador to St. Petersburg, who played an important role in balancing balancing the relations between France and Russia before this fatal campaign of 1812. And he was also responsible for trying to announce France's peaceful intentions to the Allies, which was a futile attempt, but still demonstrated his unwavering loyalty to Napoleon until the 100 Days and his eventual downfall.
Yeah, and it seems like he was in a tough spot because he was extremely loyal to Napoleon, but he was also very good friends with Tsar Alexander, correct?
Right. So he's a very peculiar case. I mean, no one in history really gets called a loyal, officer or minister for serving two sovereigns at the same time. But he did manage to, which really highlights his capabilities as a diplomat, I think.
Yeah, no, that's a great point right there. Yeah, indeed. So let's jump into his biography a little bit. Armand de Caulaincourt was born December 1773 in the Picardy region of northern France. His parents were Louis Gabriel and Anne Josephine, and his father served in the Royal Army of King Louis XVI. Were they a noble family? I assume so.
Oh, they were the most prestigious of the French nobility. Their lineage dated back to the 1370, and some people even argue that he was remotely related to Guy de Lusignan during the Crusade. And this is, I think, worth mentioning. So the French nobility could be classified into two tiers. The tier one being the noblesse d'épée, and the tier one being noblesse de robe. So Caulaincourt belonged to the first tier, noblesse d'épée, or nobles of the sword. They were the ancient nobility dating back to the medieval period who earned their fiefdom in return for their military service to the king.
Mm.
And they occupied about 30% of the total population of the nobility in 17th to 18th century. So I would say Caulaincourt was from an extremely prestigious family, even
Okay.
among the nobility.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And I know he had at least one sibling who would also go on to serve Napoleon as a general. Did he have a good education growing up?
Oh yes, definitely. He was educated, very well educated by a couple of tutors, and I assume the same went for his brother Auguste and two sisters he also had.
Hmm. Yeah, I know that later on he becomes adept in several languages, which probably owing to his education. I mean that's what you want out of a diplomat, someone who's well educated and can speak in different languages.
Yeah, he spoke French, Russian, and German, but unfortunately not English, which was not a lingua franca at the time.
Yeah, no, that's still impressive.
Yeah.
And he begins his military career at a fairly young age, 13. He enlists in a Royal Cavalry Regiment in 1788. And the
Yes.
year later, he's promoted to second lieutenant and later serves as aide de camp to his father. He's kind of keeping a diary during all this stuff, isn't he?
Right. He wrote three memoirs in total. The first one being the one you mentioned, with Napoleon in Russia, written about the 1812 campaign.
Hmm.
Another one is called Recollections of General Caulaincourt. Well, it was transcribed by a woman author called Madame Elinor, and it's not in chronological order, but it encompasses the period between, I think, his rise to power during the first phase of Napoleon's consulate to, you know, Napoleon's defeat at the Battle of Waterloo. And
Right.
the third memoir is called No Peace with Napoleon. It just covers his effort to restore the peace in Europe from I think 1814. But I believe that memoir was unfinished because he died from stomach cancer while still writing it.
Yeah, and it must be tough. And we'll come back to Caulaincourt's story in a moment. But there's so many
Mhm.
memoirs out there. I know Marshal McDonald had one. General
Yep.
Junot's wife had one.
Hmm.
Napoleon's secretary is at Bourrienne. He had one. Like, there's so many out there, and some are legitimate, and some are completely made up. So it must be hard for you to kind of wade through them.
Yeah, I always make sure to cross-check different memoirs, especially those about the same event from different factions or written by two people who had starkly different views of the current event. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but
Yeah,
that's also my favorite part when writing because it kind of challenges me to integrate all this into a single analysis and
yeah,
conclusion.
yeah. And I've been there too, where I've read like a little factoid or anecdote, but I can't find proof of it anywhere else. So I just kind of I either leave it out or I note that, hey, I've only heard about this in one place, so it may or may not be true. But
Yeah.
yeah, getting back to Caulaincourt's story. In 1792, he's promoted to captain, but is suspected of royalist tendencies due to his noble birth. This is during kind of the height of the French Revolution. How does he
Yes,
kind of
in
sidestep this landmine?
yeah, so that was he almost died, so
Yeah.
that's a really impressive impressive story. It happened in the 20th of May 2092 when his father had already resigned from the army in fear of what was to happen to his son and a number of other officers of noble descent.
Hmm.
Caulaincourt began to serve as the ADC to his uncle, General Arville, and he was on his way to join his regiment in the Vendée region, but he became arrested en route. So
Hmm.
how he managed to escape his captivity? Well, this is quite unbelievable. But Caulaincourt's mother had befriended the jailer's wife and saved her from poverty years ago.
Mm.
So owing to this, Caulaincourt was able to escape disguised as the jailer. But it is said that he was, released on the condition that he should serve as a simple soldier for 3 years.
Mm.
And, it would not be until February 1794 when General Lazare Hoche notices his feat during multiple campaigns and intervenes to restore him to the rank of the officer.
Yeah, that's some story. I didn't know that about the jailer's wife. That's but
Yeah.
but it sounds like, and this is I find this a common trait amongst the marshals too. He's a real survivor. This Caulaincourt, like he knows how to navigate this very dangerous time.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
what is more surprising is that his father and he joined, the National Guard on their volition because despite being, the upper nobility themselves, they identified with the causes of the French Revolution.
Mm. He serves in a number of engagements during the French Revolutionary Wars and is wounded twice in battle, but he also gets promoted to colonel later on. Do you know when or how he eventually meets Napoleon?
I believe it was during the Egyptian campaign.
Mm.
So it should be explained that his father was a great friend to Josephine, although
Mhm.
he later fell out of her favor for unknown reason. Um, and thanks to this, his father presents, young Caulaincourt and his brother Auguste, who was also in the army with his father and older brother, to Josephine. And I believe that this was the first time he got a glimpse of the man who was to become the first consul and later the emperor. But
So
that was
we're
really short.
so we're talking like 1798, 1799 time frame, somewhere around.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And how that happened, his father was giving advice to Josephine how to deal with all these fraudulent rumors of, her affair with Hippolyte in Napoleon's absence. So
Hmm.
Josephine was doing him a favor.
Interesting. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, her infidelities, and she was probably seeking advice from anyone she could get advice from. So yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So moving on in the story, obviously Napoleon becomes first consul 1799. And in
Yes.
1801, Napoleon learns to appreciate Caulaincourt's diplomatic skills and dispatches him for the first time to St. Petersburg to serve as
Hmm.
ambassador to Russia. Uh, what do you think his primary objective was in Russia at the time?
So it should be explained that it took place right after the peace of Luneville,
Hmm.
after following the war of coalition, and Russia, the Tsar Paul had just been assassinated by a number of disgruntled ministers which led to the secession of Tsar Alexander the First.
Correct.
And Napoleon kind of wanted to test the waters before resuming, communication with Russia, because he found, based on what he was hearing from, his agents, Russia was like full of anti-French sentiments, considering Napoleon and upstart figure.
Hmm.
So he instructed Caulaincourt in November 1801 to carry his personal letter to Tsar Alexander, and just nothing really like specific, but just to test the Russians' attitude and hopefully to rebuild their former communication between France and Russia, to establish, at least the linkage between the two countries.
Right. And it seems like he does quite well in this role, correct?
Oh yes. So
Yeah.
although it only lasted for 6 months, he met Tsar Alexander for the first time there, and it seems that his performance was very well appreciated by the Russians, because as he left, he got a diamond-studded box decorated with the Tsar's portrait as a farewell gift.
That's
And in return for this service, yeah, Napoleon promoted him to the his eighth aide-de-camp on May 1802.
yeah, that's a pretty nice gift he got right there. So
Yeah.
he must have done something right. Yeah.
Hmm.
So he gets back, but a few years later, he's involved in the abduction of the Duke of d'Enghien in
Ah,
Baden.
yeah.
Yeah, I know that's a tough one. In the Baden Principality, which I believe is where Tsar Alexander's wife is from. Um,
Yes.
what do you think about the kidnapping and subsequent execution of the Duke and Caulaincourt's involvement slash reaction to it?
So it was, a turning point in Caulaincourt's career, and turning point in his perception of Napoleon, whom he really used to worship without question. Surprising considering his later, remarks, advices to Napoleon, which was like just, full of honesty. But back then, Napoleon still had this glow to him. So this appointment, Napoleon concealed the truth of the full details of this appointment. Napoleon concealed from Caulaincourt.
I think Caulaincourt was probably like, I just thought you were going to abduct the guy. I didn't know you were going to kill him. I think, is that kind of what you were thinking about?
In reality, was not even aware that the Duke was being abducted. He was the only thing known to him at the time was some criminal in the Baden Principality, to Ittenheim, more specific, was becoming captured by another general with the same appointments. But he did not know that it was the Duke of Enghien. He would only discover the affair right after he returns to France on the 21st of March, when the Duke already had been executed at the castle of Vincennes, and that was a decision which even Savary and Fouché pleaded Napoleon to think twice before enacting. But the job had to be done because Napoleon said this will show example to all the Bourbon conspirators, especially in the aftermath of the Pichegru affair in January 1804.
Right.
And Caulaincourt discovers this event by reading the Le Moniteur on the morning of the evening of the 21st, and he is just devastated.
And I think, going back to your earlier point, I think before this incident, Caulaincourt was blindly loyal to Napoleon. Now he's still loyal to him after this, but it's kind of with like one eye open, like he's aware of what Napoleon is at that point.
Yes. So after this event, he began to keep a certain critical distance from Napoleon, and began to be described by his colleagues as somewhat too stiff and so honest that Napoleon would look for Duroc instead of him when he was looking for some good advice that was good for him to hear.
Yeah. So moving on the story, though, in 1807, he's sent back to Russia as ambassador and develops again a genuine strong friendship with Tsar Alexander. What some might say it was almost too close, like he was more friendly with Alexander than with his master Napoleon. Is that accurate?
Oh yes, most accurate, I would say, which was making Napoleon pretty much insecure. But there is like more to story than their friendship. So he got commissioned to his emissarial duty after the Treaty of Tilsit, and that was on November 1807 when he arrived in St. Petersburg. Caulaincourt initially refused to accept this duty because he did not want to part with the love of his life, Adrian, for 2 years. And other people were skeptical of his appointment as well because of his of the stigma associated with him for being complicit, regardless of what he himself thinks, in the d'Enghien affair. And also, Joseph de Maistre said he was much amused about this decision of Napoleon because while Caulaincourt was well-born and boasts about it, he has this common air underneath the embroidery, and he is stiff as if he had the marionette strings in his joints. But I should argue that it was this common air, a surprising common air he had, which helped smoothen the relationship between him and Tsar Alexander. So as soon as he made entrance to the gates of the Winter Palace, Alexander himself received him like an old friend, but everyone else were avoiding him like a plague, calling him a murderer, and some would even openly refuse his visits.
Oh my! So it's making his job pretty difficult, I would imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, so he saw a thorny path ahead, and Caulaincourt, he felt so humiliated because he was being blamed for an affair that he did not even know of at the time, and even carried a lengthy letter explaining how he was completely unaware of Napoleon's order at that time.
Right.
He would like show it around to any visitors, like John Quincy Adams from Yangtze, Mr. Harris, and other diplomats in St. Petersburg. And one day, he was so sick and tired of doing this that he asked for an audience with the Tsar and pleaded that other people should not consider him as such, this murderer of the Tsar's brother-in-law. And
Right.
what Alexander says is just remarkable. I will not read them,
Hmm.
meaning the lengthy letters he carried with him all the time. I have long since been acquainted with everything that can be known relative to the unfortunate death of the Duke d'Enghien. He
Right.
is my brother-in-law. His court is, in some degree, a portion of mine. You may therefore be certain that I know the truth of all that concerns you. I know your innocence. I affirm this on my word of honor, and I hope that pledge will be received. So from that moment, Caulaincourt, no one really, no one began to treat Caulaincourt the same way they used to, making Caulaincourt, very devoted to Emperor Alexander. In
Right.
Lord Junot's words, he was even granted like one of the finest mansions in St. Petersburg to stay, the Volkonsky Palace. It was said that it was the second best residence next to the Grand Duke Constantine's.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
So
and yeah.
yeah, so clearly Alexander couldn't have been too mad at him if he gave him the second nicest house in St. Petersburg. Uh, but in 1808, to make his life more complicated, I mean, he is rewarded by Napoleon as a duke. He becomes Duke of Vicenza. But
Mm-hmm.
the complicated part is Napoleon tasked Caulaincourt with trying to find Napoleon a new bride after his divorce from Josephine. And
Yeah.
originally they were trying to match Napoleon with a Russian bride, correct?
Oh yes. So that was what had been promised at Tilsit, so a year ago, that Napoleon wished to marry the youngest sister of the Tsar, named
Mm-hmm.
Princess Anna Pavlovna. And Caulaincourt, with this, Napoleon was getting impatient in Paris. And by 14th December 1809, Napoleon annuls his marriage with Josephine, so he is single again. And he begins to prod Caulaincourt to make the arrangement an official one.
Mm-hmm.
But the Russians began to delay all this for months. And in 28th December 1809, Caulaincourt, delivers the proposal to the Tsar. But, Alexander only gives very evasive answers.
Mm-hmm.
So this is quite complicated, but despite like their naive display of friendship, Caulaincourt later testified how Alexander was doing this on purpose to some degree, like
Mm-hmm.
keeping the politically sensitive information on the side and intentionally centering their relationships on banters about everyday life. But when the matter boiled down to this sensitive issue, Alexander would not give him a definitive answer.
Mm-hmm.
So he secretly thought Napoleon, by doing this, was fulfilling his endless territorial ambitions,
Mm-hmm.
which the Russian court would not accept, and which, if accepted, would severely constrain the Tsar's legitimacy. So as he delays giving France an answer, Caulaincourt is forced to deliver the Tsar an ultimatum to give an answer within 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
But to avoid embarrassing his dear friend, Alexander just cites the Empress's objection to marrying her off at such a young age, below the age 16. And this gives an opportunity for the Austrians to, exploit the noticeably growing wedge between France and Russia,
Right.
because Metternich, he began to notice how Napoleon was dying to marry Anna Pavlovna, which would result in a Franco-Russian alliance, which would isolate and threaten Austria's territorial and strategic position in Central Europe.
Right.
So, yeah.
And the reason for all this was just Josephine was not able to produce an heir. So then we have Marie Louise, who is the daughter of Austrian Emperor Francis, correct?
Yep. Austrians began to push for the Austrian alternative to Napoleon marrying the Russian princess. And it was spearheaded by the first secretary, Floret, who openly expressed this regret during the last party hosted by Josephine, how he wished Napoleon to marry an Austrian bride instead. And by February, Napoleon became impatient enough that he declared he had decided in favor of Austria and notified Alexander of the termination of the ongoing arrangement mediated by Caulaincourt.
Right.
And the Schwarzenberg proceeds to carry the order to the Austrian court, and the marriage was consummated between Napoleon and Marie Louise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many layers and intrigue of that story, and then maybe some of that where Alexander was dragging his feet does lead into the War of 1812. Yeah, obviously there's other reasons, the continental system and territory disputes that lead to the 1812 invasion. But Caulaincourt in 1812 strongly tries to dissuade Napoleon from invading Russia, and he obviously fails at this. Why do you think he was so adamant about avoiding this conflict with Tsar Alexander?
Oh, first of all, he was trying to make sure that Napoleon understands that Alexander was becoming insecure, not aggressive about the French. So he said after his return to France in June 1811, he told Napoleon that Alexander is becoming affronted at Napoleon suddenly going to marry Marie Louise instead, as well as his aggressive behaviors in the Hanseatic cities. And later, the occupation of Swedish Pomerania and Danzig, which was to be a free city. In other words, he was the one who was breaching the Treaty of Tilsit, yet you are the one accusing Alexander of breaching it. That doesn't make any sense. It's only natural for Alexander to be, to be alarmed at all this. You must stop. If you stop first, then no costly war will arise. Now that was his first argument, but another reason he opposed this war, this campaign, was what Alexander had told him and Chernihiv while he was in St. Petersburg. To cite his word, he said, "People don't know how to suffer. If the fighting went against me, I should retire to Kamchatka rather than cede provinces and sign in my capital treaties that were really only truces. Your Frenchman is brave, but long privations and a bad climate will wear him down and discourage him. Our climate, our winter will fight on our side. With you, marvels only take place where the emperor is in personal attendance. He cannot be everywhere. He cannot be absent from Paris year after year," which could not be more true in hindsight.
Yeah, it's almost like he was seeing the future right there. That's pretty impressive.
Yep.
So yeah, that must have been, Caulaincourt must have been in a weird position because he's invading the country of one of his best friends. It must have been so weird.
Yes, and what was more difficult for him than that was Napoleon began to accuse him of colluding with the Russians. He even began to call him Mr. Russian right in his face. And the first part of 1812 went like this. Caulaincourt would Napoleon would approach Caulaincourt and demand him to answer. Say, Alexander wants war with me. And Caulaincourt just becomes flabbergasted and responds, "No, he sure doesn't." But
Right.
Napoleon was like, no, Alexander is, a really, wily man. He's a cunning Greek guy. He is surely planning on something. And Caulaincourt's like, please no. And then, Caulaincourt and Napoleon have this argument several times more to a point where they stop talking for a while, with Napoleon secretly preparing all these carriages and wagons to be transported to Russia, which Caulaincourt takes notice of and, again, advises Napoleon to stop, but he
Right.
doesn't listen.
But Napoleon must trust him somewhat because he makes him master of the horse and his close guard during the invasion.
Yes.
So Caulaincourt's going. He's probably angry that he's there. But his brother also joins as a general. But at the Battle of Borodino, something very bad happens.
Ah, yes. So his brother served in the cavalry corps. And during the Battle of Borodino, at around 2 p.m., I think, when Napoleon and Caulaincourt were just waiting for the results cloistered in their headquarters, the army, he began to order his cavalry to charge at the Russian center, which was defended by the Raevsky Redoubt, or also called the Great Redoubt. And Napoleon finds that the General Montbrun, in command of the Second Cavalry Corps, had the First Cavalry Corps had died in the heat of the battle. So Napoleon tells the brother Caulaincourt, go and take command of the First Cavalry Corps. Do as you did at the Spanish campaign. And Berthier gives the approval for Napoleon's order, and he swears to his brother before leaving, with things this hot: I don't suppose I shall see you again. We shall win, or I shall get myself killed.
Wow.
And then he makes this unbelievable act of charging at the redoubt with all the cavalry he had. So he is said to have shouted, "Follow me, weep not for Montbrun, but come and avenge his death." With Murat ordering him to do the job. He also said, "You shall see me there, dead or alive."
Wow.
But as he charged at the redoubt, he was killed by a cannonball. And an hour later, Caulaincourt hears this news when he heard this ferocious cannonade from the other side of the Moscow River. So Caulaincourt again, becomes struck with grief. But Napoleon just says, "Now you've heard the order. Do you wish to retire?" But Caulaincourt, responds by merely taking off his hat and refusing to leave the presence of his emperor during the campaign. So during their stay at Moscow, Napoleon he just asked Napoleon to promote all the officers who had served for his brother. But by that time, Caulaincourt had become kind of disappointed in Napoleon, and they again stopped talking and dining together. That Napoleon only did this condescendingly. Nevertheless, they were all promoted. That's Caulaincourt.
Yeah, that's an interesting story. And I know Caulaincourt warns Napoleon against wintering in Moscow. Is that because he knows the Tsar will not make peace, or they just don't have enough supplies to stay in Moscow?
Most importantly, he was aware how severe Russian winter could be. And second, like you said, yes, he knew that Alexander meant it when he said something, that he will not surrender, and he would rather just wait out Napoleon's surrender while he himself stays in the Kamchatka. So he strongly advised Napoleon to not to make his stay at Moscow. And during the final days of Napoleon's stay in Moscow, he was the one who prompted Napoleon to prepare for everything necessary to march the army on the frozen ground by equipping the horses with the Caulkin shoes, which no one really cared about. even Berthier didn't care distributing the warm clothing like leather and furs until the very last day of their stay in Moscow.
Right.
So
And
it was only Caulaincourt and the Polish soldiers who were preparing for these, Calkins to the, lethal consequences at the end of their retreat.
yeah, I mean,
When all the horses were like breaking their legs on, the frozen ground.
yeah, and the ice, and that leads to disaster for the whole Grand Armée.
Yeah.
In the subsequent retreat, though, and I think this is a really interesting point. Caulaincourt, after they escape from their Zena River, they get over the river, which is a miracle in its own right. Napoleon finally realizes, like, I need to get back to Paris. There's no need for me to stay with the army anymore. It's, for the most part, safe. I can leave it to Murat and Eugene to bring back.
Mm-hmm.
But he chooses Caulaincourt to accompany him in the sledge, not Marshal Berthier. Why do you think that is?
Okay, Berthier asked to be taken along, but Napoleon flatly refused, saying, "No, the army needs you."
Yeah.
But he takes Caulaincourt. So the question should be, I think, why Caulaincourt instead of like anyone else?
Yeah.
I believe it's because it was Caulaincourt himself who had advised Napoleon to leave for Paris as soon as possible. And that happened on the day after the Battle of Maloyaroslavets, when Napoleon was, nearly attacked by a group of Cossacks. So they began to spend the night at a small monastery at Uspenskoy near Maloyaroslavets, when Napoleon suddenly wakes Caulaincourt up at 2 a.m.-ish and asks him, what should I do? Should I leave for Paris?
Right.
The Malay conspiracy I'm hearing about, but how would the army respond in my absence? And how would I afford to travel across Prussia when the Prussians were, becoming suspicious of the French, hostile to the French? And Caulaincourt just frankly tells him this: it's not bad that you leave, and you should not care about what the soldiers think. Now, this may sound quite, cold of him, but
Right.
the underlying rationale was that Napoleon already had done enough bad to the soldiers by starting this campaign per se, and there was nothing more he could do in this, front line that was crumbling to no end. And it was more important for him to reestablish the national security in his own in Paris, while rebuilding the army.
Yeah.
And that he could always travel across Prussia anonymously. And Napoleon would do so by disguising himself as a secretary under Caulaincourt.
Well, I think you make a good point almost there that, yeah, he could have taken Marshal Berthier, but that would have been depriving the remaining army of, and I think there's two geniuses in the army at this point. There's Napoleon and Berthier. And to take Berthier and all his logistical knowledge away from the remnant of that army would have been a disaster. So I think that's why he left Berthier there and took Caulaincourt.
Yeah, but unfortunately, that was the expectation. But the reality was Berthier was not proactive enough to restrain Murat from committing all kinds of, foolish behavior, because he lacked. Caulaincourt later, evaluated Berthier as lacking the capacity to make independent judgments, and that's exactly what Berthier did. Like, how he did not pay attention to the distribution of leather because probably it was not ordered by Napoleon.
Right.
In consequence, Murat would abandon the army and head for Naples.
Yeah.
Now, it should also be emphasized that Caulaincourt and Berthier pleaded Napoleon to make Eugene the commander-in-chief, not Murat.
And there were still other marshals, in the group. So for them to take orders from another marshal, it must have been hard for them. Like, if you're Marshal Ney and you've been fighting this rear guard, or Mortier, or any of the other marshals that were still out there, to have Murat in charge must have been very annoying. So yeah, I get it. So Napoleon and the rest of the Grand Armée somewhat escaped from Russia. In 1813, we're back on campaign, the German campaign. Where is Caulaincourt in this situation?
So Caulaincourt, is still in Paris and the Fontainebleau in the early phase of the campaign with Napoleon, of course.
Hmm.
And then, on the first days of April, he leaves for Mayence with Napoleon, again riding right next to him.
Hmm.
This time again as the Grand Equerry in charge of maintaining the line of communication and the horses, which had become luxury to the army.
Right.
And he still has to listen to Napoleon, just like dwelling on his philosophy of life, his philosophy on women, etc.
Something occurs, and is it after Lutzen or Bautzen that this occurs? The death of Duroc.
Bautzen, when
Bautzen.
Duroc is hit by a cannonball.
Yeah, and dies quite horribly. And Duroc is
Yeah.
Grand Marshal of the palace, and although you're not technically a marshal, it's a very important position because does it control access to Napoleon, or why is that such an important job?
So, if the marshals of the army controlled the exterior of the army, those actually fighting at the front line, the Grand Marshal controlled everything internal to the army, the emperor's household moving along with the army.
Hmm.
That is, a Grand Marshal would take control of all the expenses related to food, scouting, security, servants accompanying Napoleon, etc., as well as monitoring the security of the emperor's camp.
Mm.
And what's amazing is that Caulaincourt was serving as simultaneously the Grand Equerry and the Grand Marshal at the same time, but no friction was reported between his two tasks. So it
Mm.
must be said that he must have been very good at multitasking.
Hmm. Yeah, and that must have been exhausting handling those two
Yeah.
positions at the same time.
Mm.
But unfortunately, as we know, in the story, Napoleon in 1814, they have the invasion of France, and he's forced to abdicate in April 1814.
Yes.
So this must have been a sorrowful moment for Caulaincourt to see his master exiled, but there's a slight bit of good news in 1814. Do you want to touch on the bit of good news for Caulaincourt?
Yes. So it's a really touching story. The Duke of Vicenza's 10-year love affair with Madame Adrienne de Canisi. So he first met Adrienne between 1803 to 1804, and he became smitten with her. He was now known for his success with women, even in the court of Paris. But after he saw her for the first time, he did not know any other woman to commit to.
Mm-hmm.
And he found out that she had been unhappily married to her uncle since the age 13 to keep the family fortune intact, because she was from an Asian nobility family like Caulaincourt himself.
Right.
Yeah, and Adrienne was appointed the lady in waiting to Josephine around 1805. And it was also around this time when he asked Napoleon's permission for him to marry her. But Napoleon wouldn't really approve of the marriage. So it meant Caulaincourt had to wait for 10 years to marry her in May 1814, when Napoleon randomly gives the approval to for Caulaincourt to marry her in 10 years, when he had nothing else to reward his favorite minister with.
Right. Right. It's
Yeah, and
just
they would have two sons together. Yeah.
yeah, they had two sons together, and it sounds like quite a love story. But yeah, it is unfortunate he had to wait 10 years just to marry her.
Yeah, that must have been like just exhausting. I
Yeah.
believe like they were on the point of giving up, and Caulaincourt too had nothing left in the absence of Napoleon. But Adrian readily accepted his proposal, and
Mhm.
they never parted afterwards. So it ended happily.
Okay, so everything's going great. Caulaincourt's now married, and Napoleon's off exiled at Elba. But guess what?
Except for the fact that he doesn't have any job left.
Right. He's unemployed right now. But thankfully, his boss escapes Elba, and we have the 100 Days reign where Napoleon regains the throne in 1815. What is Caulaincourt's role in this part of Napoleon's empire?
So he becomes reemployed as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, a job he had since November 1814, when Bertrand was replaced as the Grand Marshal, and he becomes in charge of announcing, persuading the states of Europe of Napoleon's peaceful intent,
Right, right.
especially, Austria.
Yeah.
Especially Austria, whom Napoleon saw as, the bargaining chip in this complex network of alliances, because Austria was, rather infamous for shifting sides as the, balancer of Europe, and Napoleon seemed to have really believed that, based on his marriage with Marie Louise, Austria could be brought back to his orbit. But Caulaincourt also, engaged in heavy discussions with the Austrian and Russian chargé d'affaires who had been remaining in Paris.
What a tough job, though, to be foreign minister and to tell the other countries of Europe, don't worry, Napoleon's changed. He's not going to invade anybody. And I'm sure.
Yeah, and even Caulaincourt himself is not really convinced that they will be convinced. So he must have been, seeing the inevitable, opening up before him, but he was performing the job because he remained blindly loyal to Napoleon, despite his skepticism about his wars.
Right, and obviously Napoleon doesn't keep his word and invades Belgium, and we have the Waterloo campaign.
Yeah.
But what I think is interesting is after Napoleon's second abdication, and he lost Waterloo, he's exiled for the final time to St. Helena, and Caulaincourt's name is put on the proscribed list by the returning Bourbons. But who is he saved by?
He was saved by Tsar Alexander.
Right.
His friend of 15 years.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? Like, Tsar Alexander's like, you invaded my country, but because of my friendship, I'm gonna, save your life by taking you off of this list of the Second White Terror, where, the Bourbons are gonna go around and kill all of Napoleon's closest allies. But isn't that like the one name that Alexander picked to save was this guy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's more striking about this is that Caulaincourt himself never, visited Alexander to ask him to save him, but rather Alexander openly, approached Louis the 18th and defended Caulaincourt's conduct that no minister should be obliged to serve two sovereigns at the same time. And he turns to Caulaincourt and says, "My dear Caulaincourt, come and reside at the court of Russia. The Bourbons know, too, that you will never crouch to them, that your apostasy will not add to the humiliation of Napoleon. In a word, Caulaincourt, you are a man too much in the kingdom of France. Come, then, to the court of Russia, where there is room for you and yours, and in me you shall find a friend who will never renounce you." So Caulaincourt throws himself at the feet of Tsar Alexander. He, dreams of a happy future in the court of Russia, but he ended up staying in France. And finishes his memoir, this part of his memoir, by saying, "Alas, in my own mind, plans of future happiness are buried in Alexander's grave."
Right. And it seems like he lived pretty much quietly in retirement after 1815. Unfortunately, he dies in 1827 at the relatively young age of 53, and from the same illness that kills Napoleon, stomach cancer.
Oh, yes. He had the misfortune of sharing his boss's ailment.
Yeah, but still, I mean, young age. Obviously, he has a wife and family. One of his sons goes on to serve as senator to Napoleon III, Napoleon's nephew. But let's talk about his memoirs. I know we mentioned it earlier, but before we get to that, what do you think the legacy of Caulaincourt is?
If Napoleon's life was a Greek tragedy and the invasion of Russia his hamartia, Caulaincourt was that voice of reality that Napoleon had failed to heed to because of his blindness, his blind pursuit of ambition, I would say. And on the diplomatic level, I think Caulaincourt embodied what Napoleon had lacked to his own end. So while Napoleon achieved brilliant military victories, up to his mistakes in Spain and Russia, he had failed to appease his neighbors and perpetuate the glory he had earned by military conquest by building a stable network of diplomatic relations. Caulaincourt strived to achieve the very opposite of that, but Napoleon had, really mostly ignored his advice, and it was only in the later period, the late 1813 to 1815, that Napoleon began to, take notice of what Caulaincourt had emphasized during his heyday.
But I think one of the myths about Napoleon is that he only surrounded himself with yes men. Like, I think he surrounded himself with a lot of people who told him the truth. Marshal MacDonald, Marshal Ney, Caulaincourt. I think these were some men that no matter what happened in the empire, these guys would always tell Napoleon the truth, whether he wanted to hear it or not.
Yeah, he was, and I think he was like one of the, one of the most brutally honest men Napoleon needed, many of whom had already been dead by the time his power was crumbling. So I would say like Caulaincourt was, I think, just one of the most loyal ministers Napoleon had, whose efforts were not really reciprocated by Napoleon himself.
Yeah, no, it's he was an interesting man for sure. Getting back to his memoirs, and this part is really interesting. People who know history know that, obviously the Nazis studied Napoleon's invasion of Russia. And I know Caulaincourt's memoirs were of particular interest to Nazi generals during the invasion of Russia. And there's a quote from General Gunther Blumentritt, who recounted, quote, "I can still see General von Kluge trudging through the mud from his sleeping quarters to his office and standing there before the map with Caulaincourt's book in his hand. That went on day after day," end quote. So that must have been some memoir that the Nazi generals, who were out of ideas, were studying it to figure out how to beat the Russians.
Ah, yes. I mean, although like there were key strategic differences between the 1812 campaign and the Operation Barbarossa, yeah, his memoir was extensively studied because, first of all, it was very recently discovered, only after the First World War, meaning it was one of the newest accounts of a large campaign on Russia, and the one that had failed miserably. And second, I think Caulaincourt's insistence on avoiding, I think, overextending the supply lines for like for a long period of time, avoiding wintering in Russia and the war of attrition, etc. I think von Kluge and other generals took Caulaincourt's warning as prophecies to their own campaign, which the upper commandants had envisioned to finish within 10 months, which had to our knowledge turned out to be an illusion.
Right. Several years, and it turned into a loss. But I think it also talks about the stiffness of the Russian soldier, what great fighters they are, and I think that's what von Kluge and the others were interested in. In addition to you mentioned the lines of communication and the lines of supply and how important that was.
Yep. And that formed, I think, one of the theories concerning the Russo-German War in the Second World War, as like the resilience of the Russian soldiers as one of the key factors to Germany's defeat. That I believe that formed one of the schools of theories, although it's kind of died out recently.
Right. But yeah, I'll have to read this memoir. It sounds like really a great opportunity, especially the Russian one, as you mentioned, is a great opportunity to learn more about Caulaincourt and about Napoleon himself.
Oh, of course, but you have to prepare yourself for all the cringe fest at the end, during the fortnight's journey back to Paris when Napoleon was saying all these embarrassing things to Caulaincourt.
Well, I will prepare myself for that part of it as well. But yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that overview. I mean, that was a really good biography of Caulaincourt, and I appreciate you coming on. He sounds like a really intriguing guy to study on.
I'm glad, like, my briefing made you feel that way because
Yeah.
I think Caulaincourt really needs more love. He's such an unsung hero among, the Napoleon's marshals and officers, I
Yeah,
believe.
that's a great point because you do. You hear about, the Marshals and Eugene and Duroc, but you don't get enough information on Caulaincourt. So I'm glad you were kind enough to educate us on this man.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. And one more final shout out. Her Twitter page is at Second Crossing, second and 7S. It's a 2, second dot crossing on Twitter. And I highly recommend all my listeners check it out.